All right, Tracy, we've known each other for over 15 years. I've had the honor of speaking with you several times at ABA Family Law Section national conferences on complex financial issues, forensic accounting, and forensic investigations in divorce. And I've always learned a lot from you, and that's always been very important to my career. I would like for you to share some of your experience with us today. Specifically, you've created the Divorce Money Guide. Can you tell us about that?
Of course, I can tell you about it. As you know, I've been doing divorce work for 20 some odd years. And the work that I do in divorce is not accessible to everyone in divorce. I like to say about 95% of the people going through divorce can't afford a forensic accountant for a variety of reasons. And many of them don't need a forensic accountant, but they do have concerns about the money and about what their spouse may have been spending money on and whether there's any hidden money. So I created the Divorce Money Guide as a tool for someone to dig into their own finances in their divorce. So I like to call it do-it-yourself forensic accounting.
All right. Is the Divorce Money Guide just for people who suspect fraud, or could it be meat and potato divorce?
That is a really great question. I actually started out creating the Divorce Money Guide for people who suspected fraud, and that was really my focus. But as I developed the product, I realized that anyone in the process of divorce could use it if they needed to get their arms around their finances. What we find is in most marriages, there is one spouse who is primarily in charge of the money, handles the budgeting, the paying of the bills, and knowing where all the money is. If you are the spouse who's not in charge of that, and now you're getting divorced, you're asking yourself, what's happened to our money? You might not have any suspicions, but you're probably interested in the details of the money. You also probably have no idea where to start. So the Divorce Money Guide has a simple 10-step process that it walks someone through to help them understand where to start with it.
All right. To me, one of the most interesting aspects of this part of a career in family law is that the stories we get from the spouses who don't control the money seem to line up. And you and I have spoken many times about red flags that we hear from clients that say, and almost every time a client says, before they're about to say what a red flag, they just say, well, I may be crazy, but, and they're not crazy. It's very consistent. Could you share with us what are some of the more important and more common red flags that you've heard in your career that your Divorce Money Guide can help people with?
I always like to remind people that red flags are not proof of fraud. They are signs that fraud may be occurring. In the marriage and divorce context, some of the most common things that we see are a change in behavior. And I'm talking about a significant change in behavior. Maybe your spouse is suddenly more secretive. And that might be more secretive about money. It might be hiding their phone so that you can't see what's going on it. That might be being secretive about their whereabouts and their comings and goings. So that change in behavior is probably the most common red flag that I see across all of these marriages. When it comes to the money stuff, the red flags that I see are spending escalating, unexplained spending, your spouse spending larger sums of money than you're comfortable with or than they've ever spent in your marriage before, doing things like making cash withdrawals either at the ATM or at the bank branch when typically you've never been one to use cash a whole lot in your marriage. Those are some of the most common things I see.
Right. And when we talk about cash withdrawals, what I've seen in my practice, and it's 3,000 to 5,000 as opposed to 300 to 500. Does that sound about right for your experience?
Yes, I like to say when you've got the spouse who starts going to the ATM 2 and 3 times a week, taking out $300, $400, $500 at a time. Think about how that adds up over the course of the month. Or going into a bank branch and doing $1,000, $2,000, $5,000 withdrawals at a time when that's never been done before.
Yeah. Especially if they're about to go to a conference in Vegas, but that's a different topic.
Well, right. Yes, the unexplained business travel.
Yeah. Although there's so many conferences in Vegas, including we've got ABA family law section coming up in Vegas, but that's a different topic. All right. One of my favorite red flags also is the larger business expense reimbursement. So you got a W-2 employee fairly up in the food chain of the corporation and has access and uses the corporate credit card. Could you explain that in the context of how that would come up in your 10-step program?
Well, if someone is working for a company and using a corporate credit card, there is no reimbursement that happens. What I see as the red flag is when that employee, your spouse, all of a sudden says, oh gosh, these charges on my credit card were for the business. The business credit card got compromised. I wasn't able to use it. So now I've used the credit card, our personal credit card, for business stuff. When you see that change, right, that goes back to the change in behavior that I've talked about. That is an issue for me.
Now, because what I worry about and what I ask about in my subpoenas is also the running of the personal expenses through the business and essentially defrauding the company as well. Have you seen that? I mean, that it wouldn't be money coming out of the net marital estate so much, but it would be defrauding the employer.
It's defrauding the employer, and it's also providing a personal benefit to the individual. Where I see this kind of thing happening more often is when someone is self-employed and they are using their company that they own, using that credit card to put a bunch of personal expenses on them, and maybe even reducing their salary around the time of divorce. So now the salary goes away. Gosh, I don't have any income to pay support. Unbeknownst to us, the personal expenses are all being paid with company funds. It's really a perfect fraud if you are trying to reduce your support payments and look poor for divorce court.
And pay lower taxes. We like to call that the twofer effect. When I'm in the court, I'm going to have that conversation with the judge on depressed income. All right. So is the divorce money guide really do-it-yourself forensic accounting?
It's really do-it-yourself, not necessarily forensic accounting. It is some of the techniques I use, but you don't have to be a forensic accountant. It's really simple stuff that anyone, even the person who's not good with numbers, can do. So let me tell you what we do in the guide. It's an online guide that has videos, written materials that explain everything, worksheets, checklist. There's 10 steps. You don't have to do all the steps, and you don't even have to do them in order. But if you did them in order, it would walk you through what is the financial part of your divorce, what are the important financial documents you need to get, and how do you get them? And then what do you do with them once you have them? What can you look for? And the what you can look for, I literally point people to the exact line on a tax return that might provide them information about an investment account that they didn't know about. The exact line on a tax return where they might be able to see that their spouse has cashed out a retirement account that they didn't know about. On the side of the bank statements and credit card statements, we talk about things like this. Here's something anyone can do, even you, Miles. Take 12 months worth of bank statements, take a green highlighter, and highlight every paycheck that was deposited. Now, most people get either 24 or 26 paychecks a year. Find out how many your spouse was supposed to get. And after you're done highlighting them all in those 12 months of bank statements, count them up. If you come up with only 20 paychecks being deposited, we know there's a problem. We've got some missing paychecks. Or while you're counting these up, if you see one that's unusually low, you know we've got a problem.
I love that. Absolutely. And having taught forensic accounting to lawyers and CPAs for over 20 years. I love that, because one of the hardest things for anybody going through divorce, including, paralegal, where do you start? And would you agree with me that getting started is more important than where you start? Does that make sense?
Right. Taking the action is more important. If you might not be the kind of person who wants or needs to get all the way through the divorce money guide. That's a-okay. Go to the part of it and do what's important to you. I always say, if you have a tax issue that is your top concern in your divorce, then skip right to the step that talks about tax returns and how to get those directly from the IRS and what to look for in those documents.
As part of the packages that are available to the public involving and working through the divorce money guide, can you give us an example of what a person may bring to you that you would cause you to recommend that they speak to a forensic accountant in their local area?
Sure. When people are going through the divorce money guide, I am having them compile the transactions that they're finding that are bad, where you either have a serious question about something or you can write off, no, that it's bad, paying for something inappropriate, something like that, doing one of those large cash withdrawals and we don't know where the money went. We're compiling that list of transactions. But there can become a point as you're working through all these transactions where it gets too complicated for the average person to do it, where maybe there's, 6 or 7 bank accounts and money is bouncing back and forth between these various accounts. That's probably getting more complicated than the average person can handle. So that would be a situation in which I'd recommend them finding a local forensic accountant to help them. Certainly, there are times where the dollar amounts are big enough where it's just there's a volume of data that the average person can't handle. That would be another situation where you'd find a forensic accountant. Also, potentially, if you found transactions involving overseas accounts, that might be one of those situations where it's getting more complicated. So think about, in general, when it gets more complicated, that's when the forensic accountant is probably advisable.
Right. What I think is so valuable about the divorce money guide is the ability to get started, get some initial questions worked on, and you can see that it's not as difficult of a task on one hand. Obviously, testimony regarding transactions is incredibly hard, but getting that start and getting a feeling of taking back control of your life, which money is freedom, security, and independence. Okay. So taking back control of your life could be almost as important to your financial well-being as your emotional well-being. Have you had any of that feedback from the divorce money guide patrons?
Well, of course, we have a group coaching option. So we have a private community where people can come and ask me questions about what they're finding, about the work that they're doing, where do I go next? And they get, additional content from me that helps them work through it. But the conversations between the people who are in the coaching has been really important as well, where they're able to support each other, see that they're not alone, because there is a huge emotional component to this. But what I like to tell people is you have one chance to get your divorce settlement right. The way you get it right, the way you get the most money possible is by knowing what has been going on with your finances. You can't negotiate something you don't know about. So let's see, is there anything else we didn't know about? And you're right that the long-term financial stability of someone may be very dependent on how much their settlement in this divorce is.
Plus, there's a non-financial financial aspect to this, in the sense that give our audience a little bit of a taste of, let's say we find a $50,000 transfer, right? Say between one spouse and their brother. and that 50,000 just disappeared, either into a weird piece of real estate, maybe offshore, doesn't really matter. But it's $50,000. And it's clear that it was probably a fraudulent conveyance because the timing in relation to the filing of the divorce and the other change of behavior before the filing of the divorce. What is your advice when you find that $50,000 in terms of taking that information to the lawyer and taking advantage of that discovery in settlement negotiations?
Right. So I always tell my client half of that money was yours, right? Barring a prenup or some unusual circumstance, the presumption generally is that half of that $50,000 was yours. Now, how are we going to get that $25,000 back? If it went poof into thin air with the brother, it may be very difficult to go claw that back. The brother is going to say, I don't have it, it's gone, all these kinds of things. But we can go for more equity in the house. We can go for a larger share of the retirement account or other accounts that may exist. Hopefully, the family has assets that, as we're dividing these up, there is some extra that you can take to make up for that $25,000 of yours that your spouse just sent away for no good reason.
Well, I don't know about your experience. I mean, the weird thing about what we do is in family law and forensic accounting and divorce is we don't know what we don't know. So if somebody's successful in moving that $50,000 without our knowledge, we're never going to know by definition. But I also suspect that we catch quite a bit of it if we go do the work. If we go and look at the bank statements, and like you said, we don't usually have to go that far back in time unless the sketchy behavior has been a long period of time. Would you agree with that or disagree with that? And how does the Divorce Money Guide treat that?
I would agree with it because typically the schemes are not all that elaborate. The money has to come from somewhere. And so what I often see is there is that $10,000 or $20,000 withdrawal or transfer from the bank account that we knew about to somewhere else. We start tracking that down, we're going to find it. Now, I suppose if your spouse has some mystery source of income that we never find out about, there's money there that could disappear. But in many, many, many cases, I think you're right. We can find it all, but we have to start looking, right? If we don't look, we're never going to find it. But if we start looking, we at least have a shot.
Tracy, I'm very excited about this. I can't wait to read it. I understand you're working on a new book, Find Me the Money. Can you tell me a little bit about what I should expect to see?
Well, Miles, as you can see, the book, Find Me the Money, Take Control, Uncover the Truth, and Win the Money You Deserve in Your Divorce is my new book. And I put this book together in a novel kind of format. So it walks you through the story of Jackie, who is getting divorced. She's been a stay-at-home mom. She left her corporate career to raise the kids. Her husband has been having an affair and they're splitting up. And now she's finding out what he's done with the money. And Jackie walks through the Divorce Money Guide, and I take you along on that story for, everything that Jackie is thinking and feeling and finding. And it's really to show people how you can take back that control. It is possible. And it's possible to come out of the divorce process feeling like a winner. We always say nobody wins in divorce, but you can come out with a better settlement and a better feeling about the whole process.
Right. When do you think that'll be out?
It's going to be out the first week of May.
Great. Yeah, it'll be in time with this. And we'll have links to both the Divorce Money Guide and that book in the description below and on my website. Thank you very much, Tracy. It's been a pleasure as always.
Thanks for having me.